On December 18, 2002, the legendary film The Two Towers theatrical edition was released in theaters, following the positive reviews with the release of The Fellowship of the Ring in 2001. While the budget for the film was only $94 million, it has since grossed $947.5 million, claiming an 8.8 out of 10 on IMDb and a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an 87% on Metacritic, showing a bit of variation with its predecessor. Today is December 18th, 2022, exactly 20 years later, and the legacy of this movie is not to be understated. Last year, The Fellowship of the Ring was added to America's National Film Registry, and I would not be surprised and do sincerely hope The Two Towers is following closely behind on that front. While some claim The Two Towers to be the best movie of the trilogy, and others claim it to be the worst, it is still, in my opinion, one of the best films ever made, with the world that is brought to life through it, especially in the time that it was made. The direction style, the story, music, characters, and so much more that expanded the world of Middle-earth, and pushed the film industry forward in some really interesting ways. Through the style of director Peter Jackson and screenwriters Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, with the work of so many other talented artists as well. I love both the theatrical and extended cuts, but prefer the latter. As a lore channel, I will focus on how Tolkien's world was so brilliantly adapted for the big screen and modern audiences, while keeping intact most of the lore of Middle-earth for this movie. I will also discuss a few things that made this film so interesting, even amongst other movies that have tried to replicate such things since. I will also make some criticisms in this video, but overall I absolutely love The Two Towers and see it as a piece of art. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today I'm excited to continue the journey we began with my video essay on The Fellowship of the Ring last year, moving on now to The Two Towers. Thank you all for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. Before we dive into the lore, let's speak a bit to the making of this film. The Two Towers allows Jackson to expand on his directorial style, his cinematography, close-ups, and monologue or exposition scenes between two characters, and so forth. I won't pretend to be an expert on any of this stuff, but much of what I said last year with The Fellowship of the Ring holds up or is actually improved upon concerning the cinematography and making of this film. Not only do so many of these film devices help drive and tell the story, but they also make it more approachable and relatable for many audiences. For instance, those smaller, more introspective scenes that have two characters discussing the plot or lore of the film and background of the world, usually with one listening and one monologuing, really help flesh out the goals of our characters, which stay the same overall to oppose Sauron and Saruman and to do what they can to help Frodo in the destruction of the One Ring, but they also may shift to the current issue at hand. Whether in the theatrical or extended scenes, I can think of Aragorn and Gandalf speaking about the heir of Númenor and Sauron's fear of Aragorn, or Faramir and his men outlining the position of Isengard, Rohan, Mordor, and Gondor, and so forth on their map. These scenes really help tell the story in an approachable way. While there are so many legacies from the Two Towers film that we could focus on, I want to examine two of them in particular today. One is that Jackson employs a rare and actually somewhat risky technique in the film of The Two Towers, a total dual narrative, where two entirely separate stories, groups of character arcs and so forth, occur simultaneously, without these plots and characters ever colliding in this movie. For some of the movie, we follow the three hunters, Pippin and Merry, Gandalf and their Rohan plot against Saruman and the forces of Isengard, and for the other half of the movie, we follow Frodo, Sam, Gollum, and their plot with the ring, Faramir and his men, and the path to Cirith Ungol and Mordor. Now, what's also interesting, but was absolutely necessary to do in the movie format, was changing what Tolkien did for this dual narrative in the Two Towers book. Rather than splitting the two plot lines into the smaller books 3 and 4 of The Lord of the Rings, Jackson interlaces them together, having characters from one plotline speak about the others in a purposeful and familiar way, and vice versa, interchanging scenes between the two plots. This, of course, again, was necessary, and it makes the dual narratives seem less separate and more aligned, both in their goals and even in their placements in the story, even though Frodo and Sam are very, very far away from the three hunters and Gandalf in Middle-earth. Much of what Frodo's plotline does is addressed by the other group of characters in the next film, The Return of the King, at least through the vector of Faramir, who encounters both Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, and then Gandalf and Pippin. What he can tell them, he does tell them, of Frodo and Sam's plot. Another change concerning this particular legacy of the Two Towers from the book is that, especially since scenes are interlaced together, The events in both plotlines feel like they're actually happening at the same time, versus the book where early on Tolkien establishes that it takes Frodo and Sam many days to cross the Emyn Wheel, even as the Battle of Helm's Deep and the conversation with Sauron that happens afterwards is happening at around the same time as Frodo and Sam leaving Emyn Wheel. Now, this is a very interesting legacy as well, and I struggle to look at another movie, especially one in a trilogy or set of movies, as it would kind of have to be, that continues this legacy of a dual narrative in film between characters all working towards the same goal that never meet up, and having this work for the film. One of the only examples that I can think of that does this, and does it rather well, which has come out in the last few years since the release of The Two Towers, is Avengers: Infinity War. In one half of the movie, you have the Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Guardians of the Galaxy plot happening on Titan and in space, while you have the rest of the Avengers, Captain America, Black Widow, and so forth, working with Wakanda to hold back Thanos on Earth. However, even this is actually a bit less of a dual narrative, as you have two characters that are the vectors between both plotlines in this one film: Thor, who meets the Guardians at the beginning and joins with the Wakanda plot later, and Thanos, who goes to Titan and then to Wakanda. Whether directly or indirectly, the Two Towers film showed everyone that this style of storytelling works, as long as the goals of both narratives and their characters are relatively aligned. There is properly paced cuts from one plot to another, they mention one another from time to time, and eventually there are vector characters who go from one narrative to the other. It's a very interesting way of telling a story, and perhaps it did not begin, likely it didn't, with The Two Towers, but this film definitely showed that this way of telling a story in film is not only acceptable, but is really good if done well. The other major legacy from this film that seems to have changed Hollywood since its release is the portrayal of the Battle of Helm's Deep. I have less to say about this legacy than the dual narrative one, but it is still interesting to see that the Battle of Helm's Deep is one of the most apt comparisons of big battles in movies and TV shows, even today. I even hear the comparison with this battle, a long defensive siege, more than I hear comparisons having to do with the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and the Battle of the Black Gate in The Return of the King. Usually comparisons with the Battle of the Pelennor Fields are related to the arrival of the Rohirrim to save our heroes, even though this also happens with Gandalf and Eomer's forces at the Battle of Helm's Deep. I remember when the penultimate battle in Game of Thrones, the Battle of Winterfell, or the Long Night, right before the Battle of King's Landing, came out in 2019, and it was a night siege, and you could tell, or rather you couldn't, because you couldn't see most of anything. I remember before and for a time after this episode came out, it was heavily compared to the Battle of Helm's Deep, and many believed the siege would actually outshine our battle from the Two Towers, especially since so many important characters in Game of Thrones were at Winterfell at this time, and only a few from the show were actually missing this battle, but no, this battle did not even come anywhere close to being as good for so many reasons as the Battle of Helm's Deep. Unfortunately, since I'm also a Game of Thrones fan, I wanted it to be at least somewhat comparable. Again, I don't really have experience in any of this stuff, but there are video essays out on YouTube that go into far, far greater detail than I will about this battle and comparable ones, so I would recommend checking those out. But ultimately, I must say that despite a few improbable moments of levity, which I still enjoy, but I admit are silly, the Battle of Helm's Deep holds up as a well-grounded siege in a film, waiting for the dawn until Gandalf and Eomer arrive. From the cinematography to the blue filter lighting, so you don't have the problem that Game of Thrones had, to the atmosphere, characters that are present, and the story and stakes to so much else, The Two Towers showed that such an incredible battle and siege was possible for a film that was usually confined to a select few characters that adventured. We were there with our heroes. We worried for them. We felt the drama of the situation at hand. And seeing them survive and come out into the light is actually really awesome every time. At large, this movie has such good acting, an amazing, incredible score, great characters, settings, and stories. It, like its predecessor and successor, all of which I argue is pretty much one great long film, is a piece of true cinematic art. Now, before we dive into how this movie works in terms of being an adaptation of Tolkien's lore, something I can speak much more to, I will say that this movie, to me at least, seems to have some of the most generic Hollywood moments of the three films, and certainly could have had even more. Now, I don't think all of these Hollywood moments are flawed or uncalled for, but certainly some are outlandish, even in the context of Middle-earth. While some lore changes are certainly well done to help translate the story from book into film and be more welcoming to general audiences, I will say that some of the lore changes make this film seem more typical of Hollywood movie making, with some tropes and cliches being included. Things like cutting scenes together between Aragorn and Rohan and Arwen and Rivendell, and so forth, making it a distant love story, do actually work for me for the most part, although it can take away from the drama that Rohan is actually facing in that present moment. Or the elves arriving to help the men at Helm's Deep right before the battle begins, again, kind of cliche and unrealistic, but such a cool moment that's representative of the themes of friendship between men and elves in Tolkien's works. Or Aragorn falling off of a giant cliff to inevitably survive. These moments definitely add drama, but they also take away from the realism or things that could have been included from the lore as well. Again, I actually don't really mind many of these moments, but I have to admit that they are there and can detract from the story that Tolkien told into one that's a little bit more typical of a Hollywood fantasy movie. Arwen was also almost added to the Battle of Helm's Deep, and even in the background of some shots you can see the actress from what I can tell, but from a narrative perspective, even though I do agree with Jackson in that there should have been more Arwen in the story at large, I don't believe this was the way to do it, and I'm glad that he decided against it in the end. Another example of this is Treebeard not agreeing to march on Isengard until he sees the devastation, and then he suddenly decides to, and all of the Ents are all of a sudden ready for such a rapid change in Isengard policy, making Faramir this anti-hero of sorts. And putting Frodo in harm's way at Osgiliath acts as a story climax for Frodo's plot, but also greatly diminishes the character of Faramir from the books, and to me feels like more of a manufactured and somewhat unnecessary change in the film. With that said, Two Towers is amazing, but some things were shifted out of the story and worked, and some changes from the lore definitely did not. Originally in my script for this video, I wrote out a bunch of lore moments from the movie, some that worked and some that did not, but I actually decided to cut it and perhaps save it for a future lore review for the Two Towers, as such comments feel outside of the scope of this video. And rather, this should follow in the footsteps of my video from last year as a love letter to the Two Towers film. But if you are curious about these changes, please feel free to watch my What's Different series for an in-depth comparison of lore changes from book to film as I discuss many of these things there. Rather than look too deeply into the lore, getting into some more of my personal praises and criticisms of the movie, I want to keep this light and shorter, as I absolutely love this film and want to continue talking about its legacies over the years. Like the Fellowship of the Ring film, I think the Two Towers film helped evolve movie making by showing the same yet evolving characters from the first film, going up against new threats that were teased from the first movie, while continuing to introduce us to new parts of the world with vast, expansive and complex characters as well, but keeping it in a way that we understand it. Within the Two Towers, we get some advanced world-building techniques and cinematography and CGI of such gorgeous sets and new parts of kingdoms that we've never seen before, done in a way that's hardly rivaled in any cinema even to this day, with more of an emphasis on Saruman than Sauron. Yet even the characters openly recognized that Sauron is the true threat, but Rohan needed to be saved if the West would triumph over the darkness in the East. Much of the Two Towers book feels like a chess game between Gandalf and Saruman, with Gandalf really being the sole factor for Rohan's survival. And some of this is certainly transported into the film, yet with much more of an emphasis still being placed on our three hunters, Merry and Pippin, and Frodo and Sam. And ultimately, I think that is exactly why the Two Towers film works so well. This film is all about its characters, their places in this world in dark times, on perilous adventures, as they grow to fulfill their destinies. While all of the other elements of this film are also very high quality, the element of characterization and the evolution of such characters drives us forth. And such things make us continue to love this portrayal of Middle-earth. There's so much more to be said about this film, and I know there are many more video essays out on YouTube that discuss such elements in greater detail with better mastery than I have done here, but ultimately I hope to say that this film has earned a legendary status along with its predecessor and successor over the last 20 years, and has shown that sequels don't have to drop in quality, but should rather continue to build upon the foundations set in the first film, and evolve parts of the industry at large. 20 years later, the Two Towers film remains an epic movie that few other works may rival. and it furthers the themes of virtue, heroism, courage, and love, even and especially in dark times. I look forward to uncovering more about this film in years to come, and developing and changing the opinions that I have about it. I'm also excited to finish up this video essay series next year with the 20th anniversary of The Return of the King, but in the meantime, I'm so looking forward to continuing to delve into the lore of the Two Towers and the rest of Tolkien's works with you all in our regular videos. Hopefully you all get a chance to watch The Two Towers again soon, and assess what I have said here for yourselves, and maybe find some things that I did not mention that you can comment below. Tonight, on December 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be joining Matt from Nerd of the Rings, as well as many other friends over on his channel for a live watch and commentary of The Two Towers, like we did for the Fellowship of the Ring last year, and I hope to see many of you there. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have enjoyed this exploration of the Two Towers film. Let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comments below. If you did like it, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles through the link in the description below, and please check out our merch or Patreon. Thanks to our Valor Tier patrons and YouTube members, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, and Mark Kralik, Blair Scout and Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrlik, Anthony Harmon, Dorwin Gray, Arthur Merlin, DJ Vaught, Dale Davis, Alex Grimes, and King's Wild Project. Thank you so much to all of our patrons and YouTube members. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. And I'll see you all again next Sunday with a theory on what if Feanor survived. I'm also just realizing that that might be a dark video, and it'll be Christmas when it releases, but whatever, I've committed, we're gonna do it. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.